When we interview, you can't help but experience like great growth. There's preparation required. I came back from that interview and the plan was I'm going to accept this job that following Thursday. And then I ended up turning the job down and staying in Dallas. But that experience with Mr. Davis, those 5 days of interviewing with him, I know you come away from that feeling like I can interview with anyone because the questions and his knowledge was pretty impressive.
Welcome to A Search of Excellence, where we meet entrepreneurs, CEOs, entertainers, athletes, motivational speakers, and trailblazers of excellence with incredible stories from all walks of life. My name is Randall Kaplan. I'm a serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and the host of A Search of Excellence, which I started to motivate and inspire us to achieve excellence in all areas of our lives. My guest today is my friend Sean Payton. Sean is one of the most successful coaches in NFL history. He's heading into his second season as the head coach of the Denver Broncos, and before that he was the head coach of the New Orleans Saints for 16 seasons, where he led the team to their first and only Super Bowl victory in 2010, the same year he was named NFL Coach of the Year. Sean is also the author of the book, Home Team, Coaching the Saints in New Orleans Back to Life. Sean, thanks for being here. Welcome to In Search of Excellence.
Good to be on. I appreciate you asking me on. I'm honored.
Let's start at the beginning. You grew up, you were born in Naperville. You were born in San Mateo.
Yeah.
Grew up in Naperville.
My parents are from the East Coast. They're both from Scranton. And my dad was in the insurance industry. They made a move to the West Coast. My older brother and sister were already born, so I'm one of four. And then myself and younger sister were born in San Mateo, California. Then back east, when I was 7, for grade school, we lived outside of Philadelphia. Again, a job move for him. And then where I call home is Naperville or Chicago. That move took place, I think in 1978, 79. I was going into 8th grade. So I went to junior high and then high school and then college, like 3.5 hours down the road at Eastern Illinois. So,
well, we'll talk about those in.
Yeah, but I would say, when someone asks me where I'm from, to me it feels like Illinois because I spent all of my high school years there, college years there.
Tell us about the doves in your basement and the birds you had out there.
All right, so look, my father, like I mentioned, was a businessman. He worked with CNA Insurance Company, worked with a handful of companies, but nonetheless, that's what he did for a living. But he loved magic, and my older brother the same way. And so there would be a few different things in our house that were like, what are these things? We had rabbits in the backyard for a few years because he would use those in his show. And then, of course, we got the 2 doves. Now you got to keep their wings trimmed. I was never, my older brother and he, that was kind of their thing, the magic. So if you heard like these odd noises coming from a basement, in the Midwest, you had these basements. So for a period of time, we had some doves in the basement. And fortunately, I wasn't in charge of caring for them, but they're kind of messy.
Would they come back when you let them go?
Oh, they're in kind of a larger cage, and it's like a pet. But he would use them when he did a magic show. He'd do a ton of kids shows and stuff in the neighborhood. That was kind of one of his things that he enjoyed.
We're going to talk about your football interest in a minute in high school and your progression there. But what were you like as a kid, and what were your dreams when you were 10 years old?
So I can't speak for my older brother. My older brother was in the high school band, and my older sister also. I had taken a music lesson. I think it lasted 2 days. I enjoyed sports. So for me, I was classic, Little League baseball, basketball, football, youth sports, and actually youth hockey, because it was during the time when the Philadelphia Flyers won back-to-back Stanley Cups. And when that happens to a community, at that time, it wasn't necessarily a rich hockey community, but it became one very quickly because of their success. And so we played a ton of street hockey, then a ton of ice hockey, and so those were I mean, I was the kid that played, in the fall it was football, in the wintertime it was basketball, in the spring it was baseball. The conflict with hockey and football, a lot of times they were the same season. I played when we moved to Illinois, all four of those sports. And then by the time I went to high school, I had to stop playing ice hockey. So I was a little bit of the kind of jock, just enjoyed sports. And I think that was different than certainly my older brother. And I had a younger sister. And, in our household, because of the gap, 9 years, when we lived in Chicago, my older brother, stayed in Philly. He was through with his education. My older sister moved, but she was out of the house. So my younger sister and I, it felt like really, that there were two kids in our household because of the gap age-wise. And so, I think sports really were a big part of my life, especially, as a kid. Even when you weren't playing formally or organized sports, we would be playing pickup games, outside in the neighborhood.
We all have teachers in our lives that are very influential. You had one.
I had
Jared Bishop. Tell us about your English paper, what happened.
Yeah.
What was the lesson you learned from that experience?
So it's funny you bring that up. We're sitting here in Broncos headquarters. Yesterday was high school coaches day here. So we had a ton of high school coaches in the Denver area, Colorado. And I always bring his name up. I always bring J.R. Bishop's name up. So I want to say my freshman year in high school, there was a coaching change. I went to Naperville Central, which was the older school in town, if you will. It was Central, then North. Since then, there's some newer schools. But our school had hired J.R. Bishop from Indianapolis, Indiana, and he coached at one of the Northern Lawrence Central schools. And he came kind of pretty accomplished. Now, Naperville was it was a 6A school. And when that hire took place, this is 1979, he kind of was ahead of the curve a little relative to throwing the football. And so what he brought to our high school program was this excitement of a new offense, of a passing game. He had a camp in the off season, and we would go to that camp. And our school was 6A, and so generally speaking, we had a freshman team, we had a sophomore team, and it wasn't until you were a junior or senior did you play on the varsity team. So I was the starting quarterback on our sophomore team, and I had JR. He taught English, and so I had him for English. So I was actually playing for our sophomore team. He oversaw the whole program and was the head varsity coach. And long story short, I got a D on a paper. And he grabbed me after class and he said, I just, this is unacceptable. And I, listen, he had, there was a way about him, you wanted to please him. And he said, I'm not going to start you tomorrow night. I think it was a Thursday because we were playing Friday night. And I was like, I was kind of surprised. And he said, you're going to sit for the first half. And holy cow, when something like that happens, it's not the fact that you miss or don't start a game. It's that when everyone asks you, hey, are you all right? Were you sick? And you're like, no, I got a D on an English paper. It was that. And so it was just a small lesson for a sophomore in high school in a sophomore football game, but it resonated with me that, like, I got it. And I think the year after we won the Super Bowl, I think the greatest gift a parent can get from somebody is a counselor, a music teacher, somebody, a sports coach, somebody that loves their child for a period of time as much as you do as the parent. In other words, and you might have your child go through all their formal schooling, and there might be one, maybe two, if you're lucky, of these like difference makers, you know? And he was one of those guys. So after we won the Super Bowl, you know, I look back on like the impact he had, and then my college coach, and a few others. And I remember getting replica Lombardi trophies and sending them this trophy, but more importantly, a note saying, hey, I really appreciate you being a part of this. And without that spot, you know, with each of these individuals, I don't know that it's possible. And so he was one of those guys for me as a high school. You know, when you're in high school and you're young, we're all kind of, you know, flowing down the river, and then all of a sudden there's someone that points you in a direction and gives you a little bit more purpose, and he did that.
All right, so talking about college, Eastern Illinois, known as Eastern Airlines, you're a pretty good quarterback. You threw for 509 yards one game, over 10,000 yards total when you were there. Was a dream to make it in the pros, and then explain the Bears and then how you ended up in
I'll take you through it. So look, in high school, I didn't start until my senior year. And so, now that being said, we had a real good season. I got recruited. I had a number of opportunities to play for a scholarship and chose Eastern Illinois. And I was just on that campus with Mike Shanahan, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Tony Romo. We all went to the same school, but we had a snowstorm on our recruiting trip. And we were there an extra day and a half, 2 days. And most of us that were there during that extended recruiting trip ended up signing there because it was a little unusual. Al Moldy then came in, was our coach. He too was one of those guys that was real important in my development. I was a better college player, I think, than a high school player. I mean, I started and we had success in high school, but it was for a year. And at Eastern, you know, I had a chance to start for 3 years.
10,000 yards, a lot of yards.
It wasn't just the passing yards. To credit Al Moldy, again, J.R. Bishop brings a passing game in the late 70s when everyone else is running the football. And then Al Moldy comes in and begins to experiment with some one-back offense in the early 80s. Again, that's kind of, if you look back then what people were doing, it wasn't that. So I was lucky to be a part of two really smart football guys. And obviously, we had really good team success. We threw for a lot of yards. And I think, to answer your question, I think people always said, did you know you wanted to play? And I just knew I didn't want to leave. Like, in other words, I don't know what plan B was. So when I finished college, 1987 was the year of like, all right, I try out with the Chiefs one day with a workout and come back and sign up for the Arena League. My contract gets picked up by the Canadian League. This is all happening in the early summer of 87. I'm up with the Ottawa Rough Riders as a backup, so I'm not playing. I get cut from Ottawa, come back. Then there's a players' strike during the 87 season. I've got 3 games where I'm with the Bears, which is where I'm from. And then and then there's a period where I'm painting condominiums. I've got my degree, and this is the time where my mom begins to say, hey, your friends are getting married, and everyone has health insurance but you. What's the plan? And I think I knew in the back of my head, going back to high school with JR, he used to always say to me, you're going to be a good coach when you finish playing. So it's pretty powerful when a teacher or someone like a Coach Bishop tells you what he thinks you're going to be. It can kind of move you that way. If you think that, then I think that. So I finished in 87, and it was 1988. I drove a Chevy Cavalier from Chicago to San Diego State to become a graduate assistant, and then the coaching quest or career begins.
Let's talk about the 800-pound plane ticket from Leicester and then your interview for the UNLV job. We always prepare for job interview, but I think this one may have caught you by surprise a little bit.
So I'm I'm playing over in London in a small league, and I now know, hey, it's time. This is like the fourth league, and we're still in the same, we're in the same year. So in my mind, I wanted to be a college coach, and the avenue to be a college coach is to find a graduate assistant position, which is, almost like an intern position. And I begin making some calls from London, as the 88 season's beginning. So this is going to be the spring of 87, early summer of 87, because I know our season's going to end over there midsummer. And I have a call back from UNLV. Coach Nunley was the head coach at UNLV, and Dino Babers. There were there's always a few contacts that or people you've met. But I have to find a flight to get there. They're like, hey, we'd love to visit with you. And it's a graduate assistant position. So they're like, tell us when you can be here. And I'm like, well, give me 2 days, I'll be there. And so I remember going into a travel agency in Leicester, England, and the lady reads me, here's the cost. It's going to be 810 pounds. And I'm like, that's like, all right. So I have enough money to afford it. I go to Vegas, connect in St. Louis, have a quick interview. And I know that they've got to be thinking, I'm just like, man, if this guy came from London, he told us he'd be here in 2 days, and he's in Las Vegas. Certainly they knew I was interested in the job, but they had a couple other guys they had to visit with. And then I kept thinking, did I answer a question wrong? Why didn't I get offered a graduate assistant's job, a GA's position, when I just spent $820 or pounds to get there? So I fly back, and I'm going to hear from them in about 4 or 5 days. Meanwhile, the same gentleman that helped me secure that interview knew someone at San Diego State. Steve Devine is the coach he knew at San Diego State. Jim Walkenheim was my close friend, and I get a call from San Diego State. It's Steve Devine. Same thing. Graduate assistant positions open. And San Diego State was, a little stronger program than UNLV. But I'm just interested in any and all, right? I don't have one. And he talked about coming out there, and I said, Coach, I got to be honest with you. I said, I just got back from Las Vegas, and I don't have another 800 pounds to spend to fly to the States. And he made a couple calls. He said, I'll call you back. And he said, look, if you can be here by July 28th, you've got this job. And I said, I want that job.
Let's go back, though.
I want that job. I haven't heard anything from Vegas yet.
Okay, because I want to talk about what happened with the Vegas.
Yeah, so I'm taking the bird in the hand rather than the one in the bush.
Okay.
I've not heard from Vegas. And so he essentially offers me the job over the phone. I said, I'll be there. I'll be there 2 days early. We're going to finish the season here. I'm going to fly back to Chicago, and I'm going to drive my car. I wanted him to know that spot's filled. I've got it. It was great, and had a follow-up call from their head coach. And so then 2 days later, Las Vegas calls, and they've got a position. And I'm like, hey, I really appreciate it, but I accepted another position because I hadn't heard back. And that in our industry is pretty common. When it comes to graduate assistants, I don't know that there's any head coach losing any sleep over the fact that I did come or not,
But wasn't there a question that Wayne
Nunley?
Let's go to that question.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back.
What's the lesson learned on that question?
Yeah, so my first interview at Vegas, and again, I'm as a grad assistant. I get there, I finally get to meet with the head coach, and he's like, I've heard a lot of good things about you. I just have one question, Sean. If one of my assistants asked you to do something, would you follow through with it, even if you felt like maybe it was something that that you knew in your heart of hearts wasn't the right thing to do? And I thought, my first thought was, these guys are cheating here. And so I wanted him to hear from me that I was going to be loyal to whoever I worked for. And I said, look, whatever you guys ask of me, I'll do. And then Wayne looked at me. He's like, well, it's the wrong answer. And then he explained why. But I felt like I had it. Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, he said, look, if someone's asking you to do something that you know maybe is wrong, I want you to come to me.
Okay.
And so it's a tough question to ask someone on their first day.
No win.
That's right. But I felt like there were a few guys there that knew me. And I felt like Coach Nunley, we laughed about this for years after, because he eventually ended up in the NFL. I ended up in the NFL, and we just reflected back on that time. But I thought I'd made a really good impression with him, and come to find out I did. They just had a couple more candidates to visit with, and in the meantime, this other opportunity came up.
So I think at some point you always want to be the best at what you're doing, right? So you want to be the coach. So at some point you got an opportunity to meet Al Davis, and I want you to talk about the interview there and the McDonald's and the KFC and the craziness of that.
Well, initially, I think we set goals, and someone asked me this question over the weekend at Eastern, did you always have certain goals? And I think the true answer to it is we're constantly adjusting, because things take place. And my goal was to coach college football. And man, deep down in my belly goal was to be a head coach in the Big Ten, in the Midwest. And
at Michigan, I hope.
Yep, Michigan was certainly one of them, and I'll circle back to Michigan. So anyway, I wanted to be a Big Ten head coach, and so that path began: Indiana State, Miami of Ohio, San Diego State, and then finally University of Illinois as an assistant. And nonetheless, getting a chance to call plays. And I'm getting ready to take a job at Maryland, and I get that call from the Eagles, and so the NFL begins. And then there's that climb. And so I'm going to take you to the Al Davis portion of that climb. And I'm going to take you, because I interviewed with Al Davis, the late Al Davis, as an assistant coach under John Gruden to be a part of his staff. But I think you're referencing 2003. I'm now at the Cowboys. We just complete our first season in the program. And that's, Coach Parcells is the head coach. He put together a new staff. I was on that staff. And at the end of the year, he says to me, Mr. Davis, wants to visit with you. And he said, but it's a tough job now. You got to understand salary cap, veteran team. He explained some of the challenges. But when you're young and one of 32 are interested in you, you tend to drive like 100 miles an hour and you ignore these road signs. Al was and always was kind of a night owl. So he'd be up 2 in the morning, but then maybe get in at 9:30. Just that's the way his clock was. And I can recall the first time I went west, you're going to gain time, but I think it's 10:30 at night, and I know it's like 11:30 my time, and I haven't eaten dinner. And he said, "Hey, are you hungry?" And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." He said, "Well, let's get some cheeseburgers." And his assistant comes running in. He goes, "Let's get some cheeseburgers and coleslaw." And I thought to myself, because I knew he was talking about McDonald's, and I'm like, McDonald's doesn't sell the coleslaw. You get that at KFC. So I don't say a word. But his assistant knew, and he came back with a bag of like 10 cheeseburgers from McDonald's, but the real small ones that our kids eat.
Happy Meal. Well, not the Happy Meal, but
no, but it's the hamburger that's in the Happy Meal.
Right.
All right. So he's got 10 regular cheeseburgers, and then he's got a pint of coleslaw from Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I just remember sitting there in that interview thinking, I'm having Happy Meal cheeseburgers with coleslaw with Al Davis. And he was an interesting guy. He's extremely smart. I mean, he was the only owner that was a general manager of a team. He was the head coach of a team, the commissioner of a league. So his background in football was certainly well-versed. He could talk to you about a lot of different topics and very intimidating. And so, yeah, cheeseburgers with Al. And so I know the interview goes well, and I know I'm going to get offered that job, and I have a family vacation to Florida, and I'm down at Disney World. That was end of season plan.
You're at the Grand Floridian.
Grand Floridian, and every night Al's calling because he's wanting to put a staff together. And he's interviewing other candidates, but I'm like, I know he's offering me the job. I bought a black suit with a silver tie from Joseph A. Bank. And so I'm going 100 miles an hour, and I get a call, and it's his assistant, their GM, saying, hey, look, Al wants to speed this up. He wants to bring you in at the end of the week. And I'm like, hey, I'm still on this vacation that he's like, well, you got to call Al. So I called Mr. Davis up, and we talked for a while, and I said, Mr. Davis, I'm going to be finished on Sunday with this vacation. I committed to my family for this. I can easily drop them off in Dallas and fly out there to Oakland. And so I do that. And the odd part about that day for me, I'm young with 2 young children. The morning Sunday in Disney started with Breakfast with Winnie the Pooh. You sign up for those breakfasts, the character breakfasts. And anyway, the breakfast ends. We pack up. We fly back to Dallas. I got to go home, repack, get a coat and tie, get a flight, fly to Oakland. And once again, here I find myself late night, having one of these crazy dinners with Al Davis. And I'm thinking, this has been one of these like 18-hour days. And it was Breakfast with Winnie, Dinner with Al. That would be the title of the book I'd write if I was going to write something on the Raiders. But no, it was. I feel like when we interview and we go through some of these processes, you can't help but experience like great growth. Like there's preparation required. There's things you learn when you go through the interview process. And I came back from that interview, and the plan was I'm going to accept this job that following Thursday. And then, long story short, Bill Parcells calls me the morning I get back, and he says, can I talk to you like a father? And he prefaced it because our prior conversations, he's my boss. So when we have a conversation, he's like talking to me as the head coach. He said, I really want to talk to you like a father and give you some advice on this job. And he was against it. And he explained why. He had good reasons. I hung up with him, and then like 30 seconds later, Jerry Jones calls, and Jerry was at his house in Highland Park, and he and I got to talk, and he said he wanted me to come over to the house. And generally speaking, if Jerry's the last guy you see, he's probably going to convince you to stay, and they both did, and it was probably I know it was a great decision. So I ended up turning the job down and staying in Dallas, and I don't know what happened to the black. I think I still have the black suit. It doesn't fit, but that experience with Mr. Davis, so that was, call it 2 days. The first interview, week 1, and then probably 3 days. Those 5 days of interviewing with him, I know you come away from that feeling like I can interview with anyone, because the questions and his knowledge was pretty impressive.
You're listening to part 1 of my awesome interview with Sean Payton, one of the best coaches in the history of the NFL and the current head coach of the Denver Broncos. Be sure to tune in next week to part 2 of my awesome interview with Sean.